So it's an extraordinary time with extraordinary circumstances on the amount of rainfall, and then the wild card of the regular spillway being limited in its use. Had the regular spillway obviously never had the problem, it would have been chugging out all the water necessary to keep the dam below that level of the emergency spillway, but just enough to not overflow, down the river, the low areas along the river would have, I think the maximum they can do is 160,000 CFS. So if that could have kept happening, then we wouldn't even be talking about the emergency spillway issue had the other one held up.
Okay, so speaking of which, as you probably know, there are a lot of reports out there today. The SAC-B is reporting it, the Mercury News has reported it, that DWR officials may have ignored warnings that the emergency spillway at the dam was not adequate for a situation like this. Have you had any of those conversations?
I see some of that floating out there on, reports or social media. I've seen some of those articles go by, and indeed, that's something that we'll have to be looking into a little later. Obviously, let's get through the crisis, make sure everybody's safe, and make sure that the dam is stable, which it is. The main dam itself, rock solid. So it's this other infrastructure with the two spillways that are the concern, because we do have to get through the spring and a lot of runoff that's coming up. So, if the issue is that the inspection process for any of the dam infrastructure, whether it's the dam itself, the main spillway, or the auxiliary one, had a flaw in it, that's something we'll probably be looking into, probably in one of my committees in D.C. that has, with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which has direct oversight over the Army Corps of Engineers. So I imagine this summer we'll be asking those questions and looking at the reports that were filed on the dam safety over all the years, for all that infrastructure. It's probably not time to finger point quite yet. Now, there is a debate whether the side of the hill below the emergency spillway should have been paved or concreted in some fashion instead of remaining as soil. That's
right.
That's a debate you could have. Do you want to spend the money? Do you want to go through the fight it would take probably amongst the environmental groups to remove the trees and pave over that portion? I don't know. So but as far as that goes, that isn't what has brought the question in place on the emergency spillway. It was the immediate erosion right underneath it. So I think the plan would include upgrading the emergency spillway to have a footing of concrete that goes out at least, you pick the distance, 50 feet, 100 feet, so that the water cascading over the top can't start a erosion back, a back channel type thing underneath it. So I would imagine that will be definitely on the list, and that's what they're doing in the short term right now with helicoptering in large rocks and cementing those in place, so because you want to have it ready for the next round.
Right.
Indeed, if the dam does fill up with upcoming rains, that could happen.
So let's talk now a little bit about federal help. You mentioned in the news conference today that you had already been working with leadership there in the House. I assume you mean Speaker Ryan and other House leadership, as well as that you've been in contact with the White House on potentially getting federal help now that the governor has put out that emergency declaration and presumably will be asking the federal government for help. So my question is going to be twofold here. There are a lot of people on social media out there, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself, who are saying that the president should not help California because California did not vote for the president. What would you say to those people?
Well, it shouldn't come down to the politics of who voted for who, is that you have a makeup of the state. First, it's one of the 50 states, at least until Cal exit, whatever comes of that. But that said, for people to be saying that isn't really responsible. So California, there's other ways that California is misbehaving and not acting, in my view, and I think the president's view, on sanctuary cities and other areas where it's defying the law or defying, I think, common sense. But this isn't one of those. Infrastructure is something everybody benefits from and makes not only the state better, but the national economy better as well. So when you're talking highways and dams and all that other types of infrastructure, that whole question shouldn't even come into play and would be set aside. So for those out there saying it on the internet, there's a lot of stuff that gets said on the internet, but I don't think the president, and that's part of why, we're reaffirming this, if and when the governor does his ask of the president on this, that so he's also hearing from us in the House. So, our majority leader, Kevin McCarthy, he's a Californian from Bakersfield, and so we're working closely to get the whole California delegation lined up on that and be sure that it's I guess in one sense, a balanced ask of the president, that nobody is going to construe it as some kind of political thing. And because that's the last thing we need to be thinking about right now in the short term on the emergency aspect, as well as going through the year when as soon as this drives out, we need to have bulldozers and cranes and everything up there immediately starting the project to rebuild and refurbish all those structures.
Are you concerned, though, that the president might say no? I mean, just less than a week ago, he told another news outlet that he might defund California because of various political issues. So are you concerned about that?
No, I think at the end of the day, that's not going to be an issue because, we're going to be in his ear on that and say, look, there's a differentiation between the irresponsibility of sanctuary cities and some of the other things going on versus infrastructure that benefits all Californians and to that extent all Americans. So I think at the end of the day he will not use that as some kind of bargaining chip or what have you in that, because there's other ways to go after what is being done wrong on defunding sanctuary cities and other things that are really in defiance of federal law and most people's commonsensical opinions.
All right, thank you, Congressman. Is there anything else you want people to know?
The federal interest in this is that the Army Corps of Engineers is a 20% ownership of the dam. Okay, it owns 20%. That's for the flood control aspect of that, which is the federal government oversees, whether it's a state dam or a federal project. So that's why this is part of the discussion here, is that they do have that responsibility of flood control. So that's why we'll be entering into this appropriately so. And on top of all that, I just on the very positive, how everybody's pulled together and make sure that I've seen people from Redding and Red Bluff and all the way down to Grass Valley offering to host folks that need a place to stay during this evacuation time. And it's really come together well. It's been pretty orderly. I saw some of the footage as well as my own observation on the highways, and there's some tough moments there with traffic, but everybody progressed and everybody's following the advice of the emergency personnel. Our sheriff, Corey Honey, has really made the right call and done a really good job of communicating and being on the side of public safety in this. And so, it's inconvenient for folks, but I encourage them, the right thing's happening here because with as tenuous as it could have been with that emergency spillway, and you have a wall of up to maybe 800,000 acre feet that would all of a sudden be uncontrolled coming off the top of that lake.
Right, scary.
That would not go well all along the Feather River system and for probably a couple miles at least on each side. So it was the right thing, and I think you'll be hearing as the engineers look at the stability of the situation here that some folks will probably have a pretty good chance of going home, at least in the low-risk areas, before too much longer. But that's not my call, and that's what the engineers are still contemplating after what they surveyed this morning. So
do you think
it's looking up.
You think that's a possibility for today, or do you think maybe tomorrow?
I think today would be pretty darn optimistic because it's getting late in the day, and again, I'm speculating in a place I shouldn't, because it's kind of up to the folks with the engineering data and what the public safety, our sheriff and others are looking at. But at least on low risk zones, it wouldn't be impossible to see a pretty soon ability to go do that. Those that are away from the river, but I'm not really in the right place to theorize on that too much.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman. We appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.